Hi, first graders. Today we're going to practice looking at a schedule and seeing how we can read a schedule and use the time on the schedules to know when things are happening. This is a really big part of telling time. In fact, the whole reason we usually want to tell time is so that we can look on a schedule and know when things are starting and where we need to be when. We have a schedule in our classroom that we follow really tightly throughout the day. For example, we need to know what time lunch is so that we can get down there and get food. Or another part of the day, we really want to know what time is recess so that we make sure we have plenty of time to play and get energy out. So you can see on the screen that I have an example of a schedule. This is kind of similar to our schedule, but not quite the same as ours. You'll notice that there is the time over on the left side listed like you would see on a digital clock, and then the activity that we would have at that time directly across from it on the right-hand side. So I can see on this schedule that at 9 o'clock we have our morning meeting. So I can use this schedule to tell and answer different questions. For example, if someone asked me what we were doing at 10:30, then I can look at the schedule. I can go down and see where 10:30 is. I know that that should be a 10, 2 dots, and then the number 30, 30. So I see that right here, 10:30. And I can look across, and I see that at 10:30, we have shared reading. So I could tell that person we had shared reading. Another way I might use this schedule is someone might ask me, well, what do we have after writing? If I'm wondering what happens after writing, I can look at the schedule under activities. I'll go down to writing, which is right here. And I can see writing at 11 o'clock, and right after that, just after writing, is lunch, one of our favorites. So I can tell that next, after writing, at 12 o'clock, we have lunch. So using a schedule is really important for us to know where to be and when, and is a really important skill. So we've got a lot of practice with that on our class schedule. And today you're going to get a little bit more practice looking at people's other schedules that you may not be used to. So one thing to really keep in mind is to pay attention to what time the clock says and what activity is during that time. So know that you're looking directly across the line on the schedule. And then using words like before. So if I asked, what happens before shared reading? Think to yourself, what happens before shared reading on our schedule here? So if I'm looking at before, as I'm looking at my schedule, I know it starts early in the day up at the top, and as the day progresses and it gets further and further throughout the day, we go down the schedule. So if I'm looking at shared reading right here, and I want to know what happens before, I go above it and see that reading groups is at 9:30 right before shared reading. If I want to know what comes after, then I go below. So I keep going down the list. So let's ask a couple more questions. If I were to ask you what is the first thing on our schedule, think to yourself what it would be. What would it be? You can whisper it. You're right, it's morning meeting. So I can see at the very top, 9 o'clock is morning meeting. What do we do right before lunch? So look at the schedule and see what would we do right before lunch. If I look at the schedule right before, I go up, lunch is right here, and right above it is writing. What about if I asked, what time do we start reading groups? Think to yourself what that would be. And I can see if I go to reading groups here, it happens at 9:30. So as you are working today, you have your choice of doing your packet, which looks like this, or you have your class kick. And so either way, there's going to be similar problems in there. I want to go over a couple of things in there just so that you know what to expect. So you'll have a question at the top. You're going to use the schedule that's over at the side. So it's not our schedule, it's a different schedule. You'll see in their schedule that they have a little picture that also goes with the word to help you out for those of you that if there's a tricky word that you might not know, or you could always ask a friend or the guest teacher that's in the room to help you read what those words are. The guest teacher and your friend won't tell you what time it is, though. You're going to have to read that yourself. And I know you all can read those times. So you'll look at the schedule and it'll ask you a question. So these first couple ones is going to ask you what activity starts at the time shown. So you're going to look at the clock and then you'll see I'm going to read what time the clock says, and then I would look at my schedule of what happens at that time. So let's say this clock says 10 o'clock. I know it doesn't really say 10 o'clock, but let's say it does. If it were to say 10 o'clock, then I would look at my schedule. I would see 10 o'clock is right here, and I would know that recess starts for Mr. Diaz's class at 10 o'clock. So I would write recess on the line. Now I know you won't have recess written on your first one because that's not the correct time that it says on the clock. You'll have a couple of questions that look similar. You'll notice that there's either a digital or analog clock, so you can tell those times both ways. Then you'll also see that there is a different schedule about a nature trip that some students are taking. So you're going to use this schedule to answer the question that's here below. So again, if you don't know what it's asking you, you can always play and it'll read it for you. So this one, for example, says, which activity do kids do just before birdwatch? So thinking about how our schedule, we looked what happened before. I'm looking up above what happens before that in the schedule. And I would write that on the line. If you have questions, you can always raise your hand and ask the guest teacher, or you can always ask a friend. But remember, if you're helping a friend, I'm not telling the answer. I'm just helping them out and guiding them along of what to do. So I know I can count on you and make sure that you are doing your job.